Who is the most overrated rookie in the 2024 NFL draft, and why do you believe this? This is what I read on Dynasty Reddit. We have a lot of people coming out saying, oh, you got to play your flag. It's Ladd McConkey, or, oh no, it's the quarterback's not named Caleb May or Daniels. Oh no, it's Brock Bowers. Tight ends aren't any good. Or it's, oh no, it's a Ladd again, getting too much steam. No, it's Bo Nix. And then I read this. What does AD Mitchell even do well? This guy isn't even cracking my top 10 rookie wide receivers. And I want to say I'm terrified of Adonai Mitchell because this is a wide receiver that does do things quite well, but I don't necessarily think those things matter from a fantasy football perspective. And I want to illustrate exactly why Adonai Mitchell can be a bust in fantasy, but still a real life talented wide receiver that can help an NFL offense. I know that sounds crazy, but let's dive into all the numbers. Now, the first thing I want to do is set a baseline with Adonai Mitchell. We're going to look at a ton of advanced numbers. We're going to talk about what the film guys are seeing. We're going to talk about what I saw on film, even though I know y'all probably don't care. But nonetheless, Adonai Mitchell is pretty much in the mix of Brian Thomas Jr., Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, after the big three receivers. Nobody in their right mind would consider putting Adonai ahead of Rome, ahead of Neighbors, ahead of Harrison. It really comes down to what are you looking here between Franklin, Brian Thomas Jr., and maybe Keon Coleman. We'll talk about Keon Coleman and why he doesn't belong here in another video, and I'll talk about why I love Troy Franklin in another one. But a baseline perspective on what happened with Adonai Mitchell's career goes to Georgia. Obviously, it's a player with a ton of pedigree, aka he ends up as a Georgia Bulldog, and doesn't really do much as a true freshman. Obviously, this is a loaded Bulldogs roster. He does average fewer than 2 receptions per game. I mean, right about 2 receptions per game. He has 29 through 15. He has about 426 receiving yards through 15 games played. So, I mean, the man's going out there and he's averaging fewer than 30 receiving yards per game. Long story short, not a great rookie season or freshman season for AD. Going to year 2 in Georgia, doesn't really do much either, obviously. Transfers over to our University of Texas. In year 3, hook 'em horns, you will see all our Texas albums right behind us. So just know, I really want to root for our guy, AD. But nonetheless, I'm freaking pumped. I have all my friends at UT texting me how good Adonai Mitchell's going to be, blah, blah, blah. How Xavier is going to be cast to the side. And what happens at Texas? Adonai Mitchell for sure is a good receiver. I mean, he is a massive reason why we actually made the college football playoffs. Big plays against Alabama, big plays when we actually needed the man, right? I mean, he leads this team in receiving touchdowns at 11, but it's not like he cast aside Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is over 1,000 receiving yards in this offense. AD Mitchell's at 845. I mean, Mitchell's actually a little bit closer to Jatavion Sanders. I mean, a tight end that I'm excited about in this year's class. I mean, he's going up against top competition. All these 5 guys that you're seeing in this screenshot here can end up being NFL draft picks. I mean, the really one player you're going back and forth with would be Jordan Whittington, which surprisingly enough, I actually had a class with the guy back in the day, so I am rooting for him. But if you were to go in the NFL, probably going to be a round 6, round 7 pick. That's if you were to get drafted in the first place. So Adonai Mitchell did have some competition at Texas. By no means was it anything close to Brian Thomas Jr. and what he had to go up against with Malik Neighbors at LSU. By no means was this an Ohio State roster. No. I mean, while I like our Texas Longhorns, hook 'em horns, we weren't a top program when it comes to having a Malik Neighbors talent, having a Marvin Harrison Jr. talent. We had nobody like that on this team. But he did have some competition. And at the same time, he's a younger player overall. He was a true junior. So he's only 21 years old at the time of this year's NFL draft. So we do need to be giving him the benefit of the doubt and giving him a little bit more of a premium on his production based both off his age as well as the competition for targets at the University of Texas. But going beyond this, we just have to draw a baseline and say, okay, with this context, what should we expect from a wide receiver that is going to be able to produce at the next level? Should we expect him to be a borderline top 10 guy in the class with his yards per route run? We know yards per route run, super predictive metric in defining success the following year. Going into the NFL, what did AD Mitchell do? 1.72. 1.72 is a very bad mark from an NFL perspective with his yards per route run. Like if you had 1.72 yards per route run in the NFL, I'm sitting here going, okay, my man probably not going to cut. But to do this against Big 12 corners, it's just laughably bad. You had Malik Neighbors at 3.64. You had Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3.44. These guys doubled Adonai Mitchell. Adonai Mitchell was the worst wide receiver in this class from a yards per route run perspective. Now, that's not the end of the world, right? I mean, if you're bad with one metric, I mean, maybe it's whatever. We go over to his best season yards per team pass attempt, down at 1.78, a borderline bottom 5 guy in this class. You go to his targets per route run, a borderline bottom 5 guy in the class. Now, you're going to see, yes, Brian Thomas Jr. is down here as well, but also keep in mind, with Brian Thomas Jr., played against Malik Neighbors his entire time at LSU. So yeah, it's going to be tough to command targets when you're going up against Malik Neighbors. And nonetheless, the point is these 3 key measures, some of the most proven predictive production metrics you're going to find going into the NFL. Adonai Mitchell was not just bad, he was horrible. Now, 100% there are going to be players that look bad on paper that are better on film. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to go to the film because I actually had the opportunity to talk to Brett and Nick at the Underdog Super Bowl house in Arizona this past week. And they both loved Adonai Mitchell. They both had Adonai Mitchell as their wide receiver 4. And I'll say someone like Brett Coleman is way smarter than I am. And you should definitely listen to him way before you listen to me. So massive disclaimer here. But they were super excited about him from a film perspective. So I figured, okay, we got to figure out what this is about. So we went over and looked at the PFF grades for the wide receivers in this class. Adonai Mitchell at 74, borderline bottom 5 guy in this class. The only other wide receivers that are getting any kind of buzz that are down here are Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman. So the PFF film graders saying, you know what? Probably not the guy, right? He's not up there with Neighbors. He's not up there with Harrison. He's not up there with Rome. He's not up there with Franklin. No, not even close. So I turned on the film and I wanted to see what's going on because what Brett and Nick told me is they said, you know what? This is a big bodied wide receiver that is fluid. I mean, he can move and he looks good while doing so. And I didn't see that, but what really stood out to me with Adonai Mitchell is I'm watching this and I'm going, okay, well, nothing's close to the line of scrimmage. This is a wide receiver that, is 6'4", is one of the biggest guys that you're going to find in this class. The only players that are taller are Johnny Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas. And those last 3 guys are the same height, right? Johnny Wilson's the only guy that's taller than Adonai in this class. And also, Adonai Mitchell is that deep threat. He's going deep down the field. I'm never seeing anything close to the line of scrimmage. I'm really exclusively seeing deep shots at the same time, which is going to be something we prove with the numbers later on, which is just interesting to know. And we need to ask ourselves, okay, what does that benefit? If you're drafting a wide receiver that's going to be exclusively a deep threat, are we excited about that from an NFL perspective? Are we excited about that from a fantasy perspective? What we have historically seen is wide receivers that are deep threats be better for their NFL rosters than for fantasy football teams. The best example of this is way back in the day. We're going to go to Kenny Stills and Jarvis Landry for the Miami Dolphins. Jarvis is the guy with all the production. Jarvis Landry, 100 receiving season. 100 receptions every single year, right? I mean, the man just soaks up so much volume underneath. What did the Miami Dolphins decide to do? They decided to ship away Jarvis Landry for pretty much nothing, right? A late pick. They're just going, you know what? I don't want to pay the guy. And instead they pay Kenny Stills. Do they think that Kenny Stills will ever have the same type of production as Jarvis Landry or would ever put up the same amount of fantasy points or would ever be the same name brand as? No, of course not. But Kenny Stills is that deep threat. He's the guy that's running routes deep downfield. He's the guy that is, a little bit bigger as 6'1", and he's clearing out space for the other wide receivers underneath, for the running backs underneath, to have space and to be able to find success and make the offense more efficient overall. And I think that's almost going to be the role that Adonai Mitchell steps into. Because if we go over and look at these advanced metrics from Corey's database. Just by the way, all this is from the wide receiver database on flogfantasy.com. Corey from the Fantasy Stock Exchange put this together. It is my favorite post that we've ever had on flogfantasy.com. I would highly recommend you to check it out if you are on the site, if you are interested in scouting any of these wide receivers for yourself. I think it's probably the most useful thing that you can use for rookie drafts. And if you're not already on the site, of course, you can find that link in the description in the comment section. Code FLOCK, you get 30% off any subscription. You'll get my Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings, all the premium content, and all the Dynasty rankings from everybody that you watch on YouTube. Also, code FLOCK, you're going to get a free week trial. And with code FLOCK, yours truly will break down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team in a podcast for you. So make sure you take advantage of that. But I wanted to look at man versus zone and see, is there a big time difference between Adonai Mitchell's production one way or another? And no, against man, he's bottom 5 in this class with yards per route run. Against zone, he is dead last in this class in yards per route run. So, I mean, he's not productive against man. He's not productive against zone. But going right back to what we were talking about in terms of what we saw with him being almost exclusively a deep threat, you can see that his screen usage is non-existent. At the University of Texas, he saw 3 screen targets. This was good for about 3.5% of his targets being screens in his entire time in college. No usage whatsoever close to the line of scrimmage, which you don't want someone that's only being used in screens, right? I mean, we go back to someone that I got suckered into back in the day in Bryan Edwards. Bryan Edwards, phenomenal production profile at South Carolina, but so much of it came in the screen game that it was honestly probably a little bit of a fugazi. We shouldn't have bought into Bryan Edwards just based off of that, but nonetheless, Adonai Mitchell, no screen usage. We go over and look at his yards after the catch. He's at the very bottom of the class. He's at 3.2 yards after the catch per reception, which is very, very, very bad. But it makes sense when you see this one thing. Average depth of target, 16 yards for Adonai Mitchell. So this goes right back to Adonai being the deep threat for this Texas offense, not really seeing any type of volume, not really seeing any type of consistent production. And you need to ask yourself 2 questions going into the NFL for Adonai Mitchell if you think he can be an effective player from a fantasy football perspective. 1, he has to become a truly special deep threat and be an outlier type player. That's the Deshaun Jackson of the world. Deshaun Jackson, yes, can be that deep threat, can be that burner, and he can have so much success in fantasy football. Hell, I won one of my first fantasy football championships with Deshaun Jackson on the team. Love the man. But if that's the case, we do need to see Adonai Mitchell post a ridiculous 40 time at the NFL Combine. This is going to be one of the very few players that I am interested in his 40-yard dash time at the wide receiver position. An example of someone else that we saw coming out of the Big 12 that was a deep threat in college, that was not fast and ended up flaming out at the NFL level because you can't necessarily be a deep threat and slow, was James Washington out of Oklahoma State back in the day. So you need Adonai Mitchell to be fast. You need him to be an outlier type deep threat where not only is he good for an NFL team, but he's also good for your fantasy team, because a deep threat can be good from an NFL perspective and they can clear out space for other guys and not command a lot of volume and not be any good for your fantasy team and still be a good pick for their NFL team, right? Like if the Raiders go through and took Adonai Mitchell in the 2nd round, he clears out space for Devontae Adams to have targets underneath. It may be a good pick, even if Mitchell doesn't do anything from a fantasy football perspective. The other thing that could happen that allows Adonai Mitchell to find success at the next level is if a team takes him and decides to use him in a way that he was not used in college. If a team drafts him round 1, if a team drafts him round 2 and goes, you know what? We don't need you to be a deep threat. We don't need you to average over 15 yards per reception. Instead, we're going to use you everywhere. We are going to use you close to the line of scrimmage. You're going to be running crossing routes. You're going to be running slants. We are going to funnel targets your direction. You are a talented player, and we believe that at the next level, you can make plays with the ball in your hands. If they change the way he's being used, this is also someone that can find success. But it is difficult to project that when we just haven't seen it in college. So that's why Adonai Mitchell scares me, is because I think that he can be a very good NFL player. And while at the same time, he may not be a very good fantasy football option. Because even though I love fantasy football, and trust me, I mean, it's my favorite thing on the planet, we can at least acknowledge that fantasy football is very, very, very different than real football in where value is derived. But I think that's all I have for y'all. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go down there, hit that like button. And of course, if you want to join the flock, flockfantasy.com, link in the comment section, link in the description. Code FLOCK, you get 30% off any subscription. Plus, with code FLOCK, you'll get a free week trial. Yours truly breaking down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team in a podcast. All Dynasty rankings, all the premium content from your favorite creators, Dynasty trade calculator, the whole 9 yards. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really do appreciate you. Really hope we get to see you out with a live stream sometime soon, and hope you have a great day.